When the federal government ordered striking Air Canada flight attendants back to work, it was the sixth time that was used as a section of the Labour Code to end a strike in the past 2 years, using it to end strikes by Canada Post, port workers, and rail workers.
On one hand, you have to have legislation that has teeth, but on the other hand, you have to be fair to workers. They have to have legislation that gives them the right to collective bargaining.
So that was Rick Powers. He's a professor of business at the University of Toronto. Section 107 is what we're focused on, and that's the portion that gives the government the power to essentially force workers back to work to, quote, maintain or secure industrial peace. But labor experts say that's being used too frequently, weakening collective bargaining for federally regulated workers right across the country. Before 2022, this was a clause that was rarely used. So joining us this morning from Ottawa to break down what this means for Canadian workers is Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, Siobhan Vipon. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Anne-Marie.
So as we mentioned, we didn't see this used a lot before 2022. Why has this become almost an automatic response from the federal government?
You called it. It does seem like it's just an automatic response to, oh no, we're not going to allow bargaining to continue. We're going to do this. Now, before 2022, there was, back to work legislation that was brought in. It's not new to workers that the government oversteps and interrupts the fair and free collective bargaining. But the use of 107 has really grown and quite honestly is out of control and it's unconstitutional.
So if employers now know or even expect the government is going to step in, how does that affect the bargaining process overall and the leverage of both sides, plus the ability of workers to even negotiate a deal if one of their major points of leverage is being able to withhold work?
Yeah, that's exactly what needs to happen is a deal needs to be found at the table. And there's pressure when it gets down to the deadline and what that looks like. We know in this situation with the Air Canada flight attendants, there was the threat of a strike, threat of a lockout, and then a deal needs to be had. But by introducing 107, and we now know that the CEO wasn't even having a plan to get passengers home because they were like, we're just going to call, Carney and we're going to get this 107 so nothing's going to happen. It just undermines the balance at the table. And when you undermine that balance, that means that there's no incentive for the employer to actually go to the table with a plan. Because what were they saying a few days ago? That it's impossible, we're so far apart. But then once they were forced to go to the table and find a deal, they found it overnight.
Yeah, and they, as a reminder to everybody, the airline also did issue a lockout notice as well. This is after the vote to strike had gone through by the workers. CUPE says Air Canada lobbied the government to shut down the strike instead of bargaining in good faith. That's from CUPE. From your perspective, what does this mean for workers' rights?
Well, workers' rights include the right to, free collective bargaining. And what we saw in this situation is when it oversteps, that means we don't have free and fair collective bargaining because there is no incentive to actually, for employers to find a deal. If they're just able to put people out, they're able to procrastinate. And that's not fair to the workers. We do have protection in Canada that you have a right to be in a union and you have a right to collective bargaining. And so this use of 107 constantly. And let's not forget in this situation, it was a few hours, right? It was really quickly introduced. And then what it means is that workers don't actually have that ability to counter the power that employers do have. Right. And that is what unions bring to the table is the balance of power.
When CUPE says this is unconstitutional, can you remind for our viewers what section of the Constitution that they are quoting there?
Yeah, so this is our right to the freedom of association. We know that this has been tested in court. And so, we are asking two things, a couple things about this around 107 is, yes, it is unconstitutional. We'll go through the courts and that is slow. But government should do the right thing right now, which is not stop using 107 immediately, stop using it in these situations and actually take it out of the labor code because we need fair bargaining, the ability to do that if we're going to make sure that workers have a voice at work. And that is always our goal.
So there is this court challenge now of challenging Section 107. So if it's successful, what changes would that bring for workers across the country?
Well, by withdrawing that and then putting the power back, we keep saying it. It's not complicated, but the ability to bargain, the ability to go to the table, workers to say what is wrong, what is, what they need, what needs to happen. finding a solution at the table. It's good for workers, it's good for communities, and it's quite honestly, it's really good for the relationship between employers and unions. So by taking 107, that'll give the power back to workers and their unions to actually use that process. And in Canada, that's protected under our Constitution. We're also, signed on to international law where we recognize that. And so the government can step in and not make this a really long, drawn out, legal battle, and they can just take it out. And that's what we're looking for once the Parliament gets back, because stepping on workers' rights affects all of us, because what these workers were fighting for was so important, right? Getting paid for the work, an acknowledgement of what they were doing had value. And just pulling out of that process by the employer was them overstepping with their power and not recognizing that the union and the workers have a say. And like you said in the beginning, their power came from withdrawing their labor.
Yeah, and interesting to note what peaceful means in that legislation, because that is open for interpretation. Executive Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress, Siobhan Vipon, thanks for joining us. Good to have your perspective this morning.
Thank you. Have a great day.
If you like that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.